the world missed the 2010 target by a long way. The 2010 target was set in Johannesburg in 2002 and was to reduce the rate of loss of biodiversity by 2010. Well, that hasn't worked. And there are all sorts of alarming statistics to prove that. 97% of species-rich grassland lost, not since 2002, but actually over 50 or 60 years, but it's still an alarming figure. Tigers, prime example of international species under threat. 50% of people, I think you touched on this morning, 50% of people in the UK don't know what biodiversity means. Different polls are carried out on this, different bits of research, but they always come out with that sort of figure. And that is a concern. And of course, there are huge challenges in terms of climate change, population growth, economic growth. Two big things, Nagoya and Lawton. I'll keep moving swiftly, actually, if that's okay. Just say a bit about Nagoya. Nagoya was almost exactly a year ago. Now, Nagoya was the meeting of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is the global convention which sets about trying to shape how we go about conservation throughout the world. One good thing about it is that it has more members than any other United Nations convention. It has 193 countries are party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is almost a full house. It's all but three, and the three, we could guess who the three are, but I'll just tell you quickly that they are Andorra, the Vatican City, and the United States, which is a great shame, and we are working on that. Nagoya, it was Japan's turn to host the meeting. I wouldn't suggest you put Nagoya on your holiday list at all. I hadn't heard of it before I went there. It's a city of about 4 million people. It's the home of Toyota cars. It has one tourist feature. I put it on the slide here. That is Nagoya Castle. Nagoya Castle, which dates back to 1959. So the heritage isn't that great. That is a bit harsh, actually, because the whole of Nagoya was flattened by the Americans in the war. And the real castle, of which this is a replica, dates back to the 13th century. But it did mean that at the conference there were very few distractions. It meant we did concentrate on the work, no temptations outside. Huge conference, 15,000 people attended. I mean, that's think about that as a decent football crowd, and all sorts of people were there. Harrison Ford was there. Harrison Ford was there as an ambassador for Conservation International. The head of the World Bank was there, and I went to a press conference he chaired where he was challenged quite strongly by the conservationists who were there on the basis of what is a guy like you doing at an event like this? It's nothing to do with finance people. And his response, quite rightly, I think, was, it's only when you get people like me coming here that you'll make any progress in terms of global conservation. The way it works is crazy. It's 2 weeks long, the conference, negotiating far into the night. The meeting was supposed to finish eventually on the second Friday at 6 o'clock in the evening. It finished at 3:35 on the Saturday morning. And that's literally just negotiating on and on. But remarkably, with 193 countries, there was an agreement. And that's really very important. It may not seem important being here today, but it is the framework from which everything in terms of what countries are trying to do on conservation flows down. So, agreement at 3:35 in the morning, three main elements, a strategic plan, a finance package, and then I won't spend time on the access and benefit sharing here and now. We could come back to that if you want to. But the targets, there were 20 targets were set, and basically all the countries, 193 countries, all signed up to those targets. And I've only put, 5 up there, but it is just to underline these are quite challenging things. Integrate biodiversity values into national accounts, links back to the discussions this morning, but some of these are quite specific in terms of halving, bring close to zero, the rate of loss of natural habitats, including forests. Conserve at least 17% of terrestrial protected areas. I mean, 17% is, you may think, is a weird figure. It is. It's the sort of thing which happens in negotiations because you start with some people wanting 30%, some people wanting 5%, and you come together, and at 3:35 in the morning when everybody wants to go home, you end up with 17%. But it is a significant figure, 17%. It is actually nearly, well, it's obviously nearly a fifth of the land space. And so to do that is quite a challenge. To restore 15% of degraded ecosystems, another big challenge. And all of these things have to be done by 2020. That's what the global community agreed to do in Nagoya. So by 2020, those things have to be achieved. So that's what countries around the world are now trying to do. Meanwhile, Sir John Lawton's panel, again, fairly swiftly, just to say that Sir John Lawton's panel was set up by Hilary Benn under the previous government and carried through by Caroline Spellman. She was happy for it to continue its work. The panel was set up to assess whether England's ecological networks were fit for purpose, whether they could cope with climate change and the other challenges that they face. The conclusion was basically that they don't, and there were 24 recommendations as to what could be done about it. So the sort of tagged phrase was more, bigger, better, joined, and that's what the recommendations are trying to achieve. More protected areas, bigger, actually, you know what bigger and better mean, don't you? So I won't go on about that, but more, bigger, better, joined. I said it was important to follow Nagoya and Lawton up, and quite a lot has happened in the past year since this conference took place then. There's a European biodiversity strategy which identifies those things which have to be done at European level with countries working together. National ecosystem assessment was produced in early June and closely followed by the Natural Environment White Paper. And Think Big, which was another publication which was talking about or demonstrating how large-scale landscape conservation could work and had been shown to work in many areas. And then the England Biodiversity Strategy itself, which was produced published in August. And Caroline Spellman, the Secretary of State, was very keen to make sure that was done. Just to underline the point about getting on with things, one of many reasons why the 2010 target wasn't met was because in 2002, people agreed to target 2010, and I think most people thought, well, that's quite a way away. We can forget about that for now. We'll take action later on. Of course, by the time people focused in on it, 2006, 2007, it was too late to seriously make much difference by 2010. A lot of determination in government that we should get on with this one. So an England Biodiversity Strategy was produced within a year of the conference, produced in August, and England was the 5th out of those 193 countries to produce a strategy. But of course, producing a strategy is fine, and it's sort of quite easy, really, because it's producing a publication, agreeing it with other government departments, but it's doing things to follow it up and making sure it doesn't just rest on the shelf, which is important. So the white paper back in June and the strategy which followed in August, key elements here, it endorsed the Lawton recommendations, the 24 recommendations I mentioned about how to go about improving the state of the ecological network. Nature improvement areas was a new concept, basically looking to get partnerships, local authorities, business, government agencies to work together on particular targeted areas which were going to be identified to improve the conservation status. Lawton recommended we should have 12 of those. The competition was launched in the summer and there were 76 applications. So there's quite an endorsement of the process. Those have now been whittled down to 20 and there's a further sifting to go to get them down to the 12, which will run from April. Offsets is a trial process, but basically it is about local authorities negotiating with developers that if they are going to cause damage to wildlife or nature in making a development proposal, that equivalent value nature provision is made elsewhere. So it's offsetting the damage caused by development proposals. Quantifiable targets, well, that's just important because if we don't have quantifiable targets, we won't know if we've succeeded or not. So there are some quite specific targets in the strategy about what has to be achieved by 2020 in order to do our bit for the global effort. Gardening competition, small scale, nice idea, government working with wildlife trusts. Quick statistics here, I just wrote down. For example, there are 3.8 million gardens in London. Together they cover 40,000 hectares. That's 24% of London is covered by gardens. And if we can encourage wildlife-friendly gardening there and elsewhere, it will actually make quite a difference. And Autumn Watch was highlighting that this week. People. I wanted to home in on people in particular. There's a large people section in the England Biodiversity Strategy, and the UK is unique in the world. It is the envy of the world for the scale of the volunteer effort. To give you some examples quickly, I was with the British Trust for Ornithologists last week, and they had 1.75 million hours of voluntary effort last year, counting birds. That's 225,000 person days, so that is about 1,000 full-time people, volunteers with one organisation. It's colossal, and no other country in the world has that. If I could introduce Octavius. This is Octavius Pickard Cambridge, who lived from 1828 to 1917. He was a vicar. He discovered 200 species of spider in Britain. He went out and crawled around and found spiders. And described hundreds more from around the world. He was the first one to describe funnel web spiders and the red-kneed tarantula. So, I mean, that sort of voluntary effort, sort of experts, is really quite unusual. And the UK does pretty well at harnessing that effort in terms of collecting information which informs the policies that we take forward. Partnership. Well, I say to ministers, I talk to ministers quite a bit, and I do use biodiversity as being a particularly powerful example of the big society in action, bringing different parts of society together, local authorities, NGOs, business, academics, and so on. And, it couldn't work without that sort of partnership. I mentioned the Bristol Natural History Consortium as well here, BNHC, which organises this. It's just a prime example of local people coming together, local organisations coming together and having a real impact and organising worthwhile events like this. But the amount of voluntary input, it sounds big in terms of 1.75 million hours and all that sort of thing, but actually it's tip of the iceberg stuff, really. I do a little bit of volunteering, a very little bit, really. Once a month I go to the Backwell Environmental Trust, about 10 miles down the road from here, and help with scything or coppicing or whatever. And typically we get about 12 people turning up for that sort of work. And it's very fulfilling, very satisfying, and we stop for coffee for half an hour in the middle, and that's satisfying as well. But I was chatting to one of the trustees there a little while ago, and he said this to me. I mean, he didn't know that I was anything to do with this kind of work and the England Biodiversity Group and so on, but he said to me, everybody wants biodiversity, but nobody is prepared to do anything about it. And that was a perspective from a trustee of a local trust not so far away. And in a way, the numbers I mentioned are disappointing. I mean, 12 people on a Saturday morning, a sunny Saturday morning, when it's within 2 miles of a town of 20,000, when it's within 10 miles of a city of 400,000, you could see his frustration. So, it's sort of mixed message there. I mean, some tremendous volunteering going on around the place, but there clearly could be a lot more. Moving swiftly through, just initiatives, a couple more. I've spoken about nature improvement areas already, and I've spoken about offsets and so on. So there's all of that stuff in the white paper. Natural Connections is about trying to encourage improved access for school children to conservation activities. And I think, an example already of success in that area is the point about making it much easier for schools to take school trips out without having to bother so much on health and safety considerations. that's got to be a key theme. If we don't get the young people interested, understanding, we won't get anywhere. BioBlitz, I just thought I'd mention BioBlitz because that's another Bristol Natural History Consortium initiative, and that is basically the concept, you may know, of people being invited to descend on a particular area or on an estate or whatever, and just find as many different species as they can within a 48-hour period, or perhaps even 36 hours, I mean, within a day and a half, something like that. And 34 of these took place around the country last year. They had something like 50,000 attendees, and a large number of experts, again, volunteering to come along and try and identify these species. And certainly the first time I went to one, I was astonished to find how many species were found in such a short period. I think the figure was 530, something like that, in Ashton Court. It's astonishing, really. So, I'm keen on that. We'd like to encourage that, I mean, both as a means of education and information. Otter, yes. I put that up for two reasons. I mean, partly because it is easy to talk about all the problems with the ones I mentioned, the tigers and the meadows and so on. The otters has been quite a success story with every county in the country now having otters. That was announced by the Environment Agency in August. The last county in England to have otters was Kent. You probably saw the story about otters in Bristol docks. A little story about, again, back where I live, Nailsea, about 10 miles away. A little while ago, a friend of our daughter's was driving a car about half a mile outside the town and ran over an otter. And he took it to the vets. It was quite nice, you know, that he did that in a sense. It wasn't dead. He took it to the vets, but it couldn't be saved. The positive sides of that are, first of all, that there were otters there in the first place, because 20 years ago when we moved to Nailsea, I don't think there were otters in Somerset. I think there's been a tremendous recovery of the otter population. It was reassuring as well, I think, that he bothered to take it to the vets to see if it could be saved. I thought that was reassuring in terms of young people of today and all that sort of thing. But what I did find a bit disconcerting was that when he took it to the vets, he didn't know what it was. Is that odd? I don't know. I think we need to do something about that if we can in terms of communications. It's easy-ish to produce these documents. It's important not to have them lying on the shelf, and we're trying to avoid that. But there are these colossal challenges which we have to try and do what we can. We're not even the lead department for many of these. Climate change, planning reform, common agricultural policy reform, common fisheries policy reform. They're all coming up. They're all in the process of being talked about. We need to get the right outcomes from all of those. Otherwise, there will be very little chance, if any, of achieving our targets that we've agreed to internationally. So just to finish, I think there's some cause for optimism. I mean, the otter story is a very good story. There are others. Successful species recovery, clear determination to improve habitat. I think there's a better framework than we've had before. I think the England Biodiversity Strategy sets out quite clearly what we have to achieve. Budgets have held up. I'd forgotten that Doug was going to be here when I put that on, because the Natural England budget, which Doug works with, hasn't held up. But by and large, budgets have held up reasonably well in the comprehensive spending review, which is a great process the government goes through and examines its expenditure very carefully. Some of our budgets have actually gone up, which is reassuring. Government can only do so much, clearly, but big partnership, as I've said earlier. And finally, how can we help to make the man on the Backwell Hill become more optimistic? That, I think, talking to him was one of the most disconcerting features of the last year. So a great deal of positive stuff, I think, but I think in terms of getting through to people and working with people, there's quite a bit to be done. Thank you.